Okay, say it with me. Gnome,
Gnome,
re, gone.
gone.
Gnomeregan.
Nomergon!
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilar, and it's finally here. Season of Discovery Phase 2 will be going live within just a couple hours of this video going live on YouTube. So that means it is finally time to level up to 40, start digging into all the new content that's around, all the new runes and the new Gnomeregan raid and all of that coming in Season of Discovery Phase 2. And so for this video, I wanted to share some general tips and tricks for how to make that leveling experience and make your first few days in Season of Discovery Phase 2 a lot more enjoyable, whether that's rushing all the way to max level or taking your time a bit. Now, as much as possible, I'm trying to keep this video as spoiler-free as it possibly can, so don't worry about me accidentally spoiling any of the new runes or anything along those lines that you are wanting to potentially discover yourself in the game. I'm not going to be talking about any of those specifics throughout this video. In fact, I actually have a section a little bit later on where I'll be giving some general tips for how to avoid those spoilers if that's what you're wanting. Also, last quick reminder before we get started, I'm doing a streamathon. I'm going to be live here on YouTube as well as over on Twitch. And we're going to have all sorts of fun unlocks and challenges and goals that we can work towards throughout the streamathon. Some really fun stuff lined up. A lot of things that will make my leveling experience very interesting. General tip that I would give immediately out of the gate for leveling is don't do a streamathon in which people can make your WASD keys be scrambled so that it's more difficult for you to move around. That's generally not a very efficient thing to do while you're trying to level. I did post a video yesterday that has some more information on that streamathon, so if you're interested, check that out, or just tune in live, like I said, here on YouTube as well as on Twitch TV. All right, so first of all, biggest tip that I want to give for going into and finding ways to enjoy your leveling experience and enjoy your first few days of Season of Discovery Phase 2 is that there's no rush, unless you want there to be. The only thing you could really miss out on by not leveling super quickly is the first reset or two of Gnomeregan. Because reminder, as we talked about last week in the big info drop that they put out, it's going to be on a 7-day lockout at first. And that first reset isn't until February 13th. So from the start of SOD Phase 2, we have 5 days to get to level 40 if you want to hit that first reset of Gnomeregan. Which, if you've already had a character at level 25, and especially if you're already you've got some raid gear from BFD, you're feeling pretty confident going into Phase 2, it's probably not going to take you that long to get to level 40. And even if you do miss that first lockout, then the next one is another 7 days later. So you've got plenty of time to get to level 40. But you probably didn't come here looking for tips and tricks on how to level slowly in Season of Discovery Phase 2. So let's talk about some of the different approaches for fast leveling, some of the things that you might want to be aware of that will be available to you while you're leveling, and some of the methodologies of how to get there as quickly as you can. Now, realistically, I'm well aware that this video is only coming out a couple of hours before Season of Discovery Phase 2 actually unlocks, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about big things that you can prepare in advance. I'll have a couple of little tips on that, but mostly I'm going to talk about some of your options once the button's pushed and once the servers are actually going and once the level cap is raised, what you have available to you. Now, the most efficient method for leveling is probably dungeon grinding, especially if you can get an organized group that's able to run those dungeons back to back to back and make it very, very quick clears every time. This would probably be something that you would want to either have determined what your group is ahead of time so that everyone knows where they're going to be and what's going on, or you could probably actually find groups. There tends to be a lot of people looking for people to help them grind through dungeons, even just in trade chat and so on, once the level cap is actually raised. And the process for this is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You go into a dungeon, you kill a bunch of mobs, you leave, you reset, and you just go again. And because of that, the dungeons you'll want to do for this are those that have a very high concentration of mobs and are pretty easy to get back out of. You don't want to be wasting a whole ton of time backtracking through the entire dungeon if you can avoid it. If you're an Alliance player, that means the stockades. There are a ton of mobs in there. They're all very densely packed together. It's easy to get big pulls and just clear through them constantly. You can clear the whole thing very quickly, and there really isn't any slowing down at all ever inside of the stockades right at level 25. And you can grind that thing all the way up to about level 30 and still be getting a very, very efficient run each time. If you're Horde, then your best bet would probably be Razorfen Crawl. In fact, there's a couple of different routes you can take through there. When you're just getting into it, the mobs towards the end of the dungeon are kind of high level. So I know a lot of groups will go and they'll kill Rugug just kind of off to the side as you're running through. They'll go all the way up to the boar boss and then kill the boar boss and then back out again, because everything after that gets a bit too high level and it slows down a bunch. Once you start getting to like level 28, 29, then you can start to look to do actual full clears of Razorfen Crawl. But the biggest thing either way for both Alliance and Horde is that once you hit 30, you probably want to go straight over to Scarlet Monastery. With the qualifying factors of lots of mobs and pretty easy to get back out of, every wing in Scarlet Monastery is useful for at least some part of the leveling process. So right at level 30, you can get pretty good XP out of spam running Graveyard. Then around 33, you head over to Library. Another 3 levels around 36, you head to Armory. And then a couple levels in Armory, you can head over to Cathedral and start at level 38, spamming through there. And one of the big advantages to this approach is also just that there's a lot of loot in Scarlet Monastery that many characters and many classes are going to want for going into Gnomeregan. You can get a lot of your sort of pre-raid gearing. And in fact, there's even a few items in there that might still be useful after raid gear. You can get a lot of that done ahead of time and get yourself a leg up on level 40 progression by doing this as part of your leveling process. The downside, of course, is that it can get pretty monotonous. You're going to be running these dungeons over and over and over and over and over again. And at some point, your brain shuts off and you're just mindlessly plowing through these things. And it can get pretty dull. Now, for a lot of people, that's completely fine. You just pop on a podcast, you're hanging out with your buddies in Discord or whatever. You're watching Netflix on your other monitor. I don't know. But it's certainly something where it could get kind of dull if just spamming dungeons over and over and over again is not really your cup of tea. So the other option that's available is questing. Now, if you remember from every MMORPG release that's ever occurred, including Season of Discovery Phase 1, those first few questing zones are going to be kind of packed. There's just going to be a lot of people fighting over quest mobs, especially for those first few quests in a given questing hub. Now, if you're watching this right as it went up, you may still have time to do what I've done, which is I've actually completed the sort of first step quests, haven't turned them in, but completed the first step quests for pretty much everything in Darkshire, in Duskwood, because that's where I'm going to be starting off my leveling experience. So that way, once the level cap is actually raised and phase 2 begins in earnest, I can just quickly turn in all those quests and already be on step 2 of those chains. Well, which basically the idea is to put me one quest ahead of the main group. And generally speaking, once you can get ahead of that main mob of people that are all trying to complete the same quests, it does get much easier. In fact, you'll pretty quickly find yourself at a point, as long as you can stay ahead, that you just get more and more and more ahead, because the mob they're all caught back here somewhere and you're way over here already taking care of like 3 or 4 quests ahead of them. It is important that you're able to maintain that lead, of course. So once you're ahead, you kind of just got to keep going. But if you can stay there, it makes all the questing much easier. One other advantage of the questing approach is that this is Season of Discovery. We know there's going to be new things to be found and new sort of secrets and runes, especially hidden out throughout the world. In phase 1, we know that most of those were things that you could just find while questing. If you're dungeon grinding, you're going to be in the same environment for extended periods of time. And it's not impossible, but it's unlikely that the new runes and stuff that you're looking for will be found inside those dungeons. However, if you're out questing, there's a great opportunity for you to just stumble across things and find the new stuff and find the new runes just by virtue of your leveling experience. So I guess just sort of to summarize the pros and cons of these two approaches before we move on any further. Dungeon grinding, it's much more efficient. You're able to get a lot more XP faster. You don't have to worry about like fighting for spawns over things. You literally just reset the dungeon and they're all right there again. It's all instant, so you don't have to worry about other people getting in the way. But downsides are you are less likely to discover any of the new stuff out in the world, and you do need to get together an organized group, and you are somewhat then reliant on those other group mates. Questing, on the other hand, is much more easy to do by yourself because you literally just need to be by yourself to do this. And you have more potential of finding the new stuff that's out in the world in the process and discovering those runes on your way up to max level. But you are more likely to get stuck fighting for spawns, and if you can't stay ahead of the curve, you are going to get bogged down and slowed down pretty tremendously. I'm planning to take the questing approach, but I may end up switching over to dungeons at some point if it's just there's too many people, too many other people had the same like optimization ideas that I had, and it just ends up being too slow. May end up switching over to dungeons at some point, but I'm planning on starting off with questing because I want that ability to find and discover these new things out in the world. And speaking of things that are found out in the world, we know of a few changes that have occurred to waylaid supplies that may actually turn them into a pretty fruitful way to gain experience while leveling. First off, and this change is already live, the uncompleted boxes now stack up to 12 unique in your inventory instead of just one. That means you don't have to instantly complete them. You don't have to immediately run back and turn them in. You can actually hold a few boxes in your inventory and wait until a point that's natural in your questing to need to go back to a city to turn those in. Blizzard has also said that they have given significant increases in experience. I believe those are exact words, significant increases in experience to the waylaid supplies. So it will probably be worth, once you've got like 5 or 6 of those boxes, just taking the trip, heading back to Stormwind, heading back to Orgrimmar, what have you, turning in those boxes, maybe buying some of the parts off the auction house if you need to, and then heading back out again. Now, I have heard, and I wasn't able to find this again while researching for this episode. It's possible I just missed it somewhere. But I have been told that once you're past level 25, only the new boxes that are added in phase 2 will actually give you experience points. So stockpiling a whole bunch of the old boxes wouldn't have helped. It's only the new boxes that will actually give you the XP once you're past that level gap. But this could potentially be another point in favor of the questing approach, because you really don't find a lot or any of those boxes while doing dungeons. At least in the past, we haven't. They're mostly found while out questing and killing mobs in the world, looting chests, and so on. So it's possible that the amount of chests that you're able to get will in fact help you be able to get a little bit more of an advantage to the questing process for leveling. The other big change that Blizzard announced is that they've added XP gains to Blackfathom Deep, specific extra XP gains over top of just killing the mobs that are in there. Now, we don't really know exactly how much XP that's going to be at this stage. There were a couple spells data mined that seem like they're granting either 3,000 or 5,000 experience, but we don't know how often those fire, if that's like every boss you get one of those, which ones are on which bosses, etc. So we don't know the exact amount of XP that you get from running Blackfathom Deeps, but what we do know is that Blizzard has specifically stated this to be useful for leveling. So as long as you can get a decent group that can clear a BFD pretty quickly, which especially once people start getting a couple levels in is going to be very easy to find, almost certainly this will be worth your time. And this remains available up to and including level 39. So it's not until you actually hit 40, when the XP gains get turned off for phase 2 anyway, that you would not be able to gain XP from Blackfathom Deeps anymore. A reminder, it's on a 3-day lockout, and it's staying on that 3-day lockout despite what's going on with Gnomeregan. So it seems very reasonable that at least one of those runs, maybe 2, would be a good way for you to get a good extra chunk of XP towards getting to level 40. The next tip that I want to mention is, it's a pretty specific one, but if you're questing, just be careful with Stranglethorn. If you're on a PvP server, Stranglethorn is notorious to be a major world PvP hotspot because it's one of the first zones while questing that same level characters from both factions kind of get shoved into. As someone who exclusively played on PvP servers until PvP servers were removed in favor of the war mode system in, Battle for Azeroth, I can tell you that Stranglethorn tends to be a bit of a bloodbath. And in Season of Discovery Phase 2, that will be the case even on PvE servers during the Blood Moon event, which will happen for 30 minutes every 3 hours. Quick reminder on how this event works if you haven't caught it yet. It basically turns the entire zone into a free-for-all PvP zone for that full half hour. So that means even if you're playing on a PvE server, while this event is active, anyone that you're not in a party with will have the ability to attack and kill you. And in fact, they will be incentivized to do so. Now, before you panic too much about that, this can be turned off. There's an NPC, I believe it's a Zandalarian Emissary NPC, that you can talk to that will opt you out of the event so that you don't have to worry about it being a free-for-all PvP zone while you're in it. And I don't think we know yet exactly how that works mechanically, if it just only puts you on, like if it puts you on a layer where that event is just fully disabled, or like a different version of the zone, so you're only in there with other people who have it disabled, or if it's a zone where there are people of the opposing faction that if you're on a PvP server could still attack you, but your friendly faction would not be able to. We're not sure on the specifics of it, but we do know that if you're wanting to quest during the Blood Moon event inside Stranglethorn Vale and you don't want to be attackable, you're going to want to talk to this NPC and opt out of it. And again, if you're on a PvP server already, you're still not safe. You can still be attacked by members of the opposing faction. It's just not free for all. It is also on a set schedule, so even if it's something that you do want to engage with and you're like, yeah, I'm interested in that a little bit of the time, but just maybe not all the time, you can focus your questing around when it's not active, and then participate in the event when it is active. It's active for 30 minutes and it's on a 3-hour timer. So 2.5 hours of no blood moon to half an hour of blood moon. I definitely recommend if you're leveling on kind of the slower side and you're really in Stranglethorn focusing on leveling, definitely recommend turning it off if it's been like a week, because there's gonna be a lot of level 40s in that zone trying to grind things for the rewards that you can get from the events. There's some really good rewards that you can get from the event. So definitely just keep that in mind. Anyway, we'll move on. I'll toss in a quick reminder as well that there is now a 50% XP buff for everyone who is below level 25. So 1 through 24, if you have an alt that hasn't quite made it yet, and you're like, I kind of want to play this other character, but they're not level 25 yet, you just go for it, honestly. Like I said, it's not a huge rush, and that 50% XP buff will get you to 25 very quickly. It's honestly my recommendation at the very least. Play the class that you're going to want to play throughout Season of Discovery Phase 2, regardless of if you've already leveled them, because you're going to be able to get caught up very quickly. And the last few tips that I want to give in this video are around spoilers, and specifically how to avoid some spoilers, especially if you're someone that wants to be able to discover a lot of the things in Season of Discovery by yourself. Now, a lot of it's somewhat obvious, like don't go read a post on Wowhead that says, spoiler warning, here's all the runes for everything, if you don't want to know what all the runes are. But that kind of shows what I consider to be step one of the process of avoiding spoilers, which is deciding what you consider to be a spoiler in the first place. Maybe you want to discover absolutely everything for yourself, and you just want to go in there and immerse yourself and just completely solo try to figure everything out. Or maybe you're okay with being told something as long as it's like by a friend who found it and not necessarily by a friend who went and looked it up online or something. And I also find that most people have a different idea of what things they're okay to be spoiled on and what they're not. Like me, for example, I don't have a problem knowing what the loot drops are from Gnomeregan, but I absolutely do not want to know any of the boss mechanics before getting to those bosses. I don't mind knowing what runes exist, but I absolutely do not want to know how to get them in advance. For me, knowing what items will be available and knowing what runes will be available and, class tuning, stuff like that, for me, that just helps me determine what class I want to play and discover the actual content with. The actual content then, again, for me, is learning how to defeat the bosses, learning how to find the runes, and just discovering things that are new out in the world. But that's not the same for everyone. Maybe there are people who are totally fine with knowing how to get all the runes in advance because they want to be able to go and get those runes right away, but they maybe don't want to know the boss mechanics in Gnomeregan. Or maybe vice versa. Maybe there are people who want to discover the runes themselves, but as soon as they get into a raid, they're like, yeah, just tell me what the mechanics are so that I don't wipe us. Which, side note, we will have a how not to wipe people in Gnomeregan video pretty much as soon as I know how to not wipe people in Gnomeregan. But anyway, some general tips on how to avoid spoilers. Pretty obvious first one. If you don't want to be spoiled by people talking in general chat, turn off general chat. Same goes for trade, same goes for looking for group, etc. And maybe consider having a conversation with your guild about this as well. If you maybe you don't want to turn off guild chat, but you also don't want to be reading people talking about where to get runes and stuff in guild chat. Maybe that's something to bring up to people that you're playing with and just let them know, hey, this is what I don't want to be spoiled on. Another tip I'll give, if you do want to look some things up, is that Wowhead's guides were very good about compartmentalizing those spoilers in the guides that they put out for phase 1. There was, for example, there were pages that you go to that would list all of the runes for your class, but you had to click something in order to see where they came from. So that way you could know what the runes are without necessarily knowing how to get them. They had also added a table sort of at the bottom of that page, which I hope they add again going forward into phase 2, that would list where runes could be found, but again, not list where what the actual steps were inside of that table. So you had the ability to look and see like, okay, I've completed the questing in this zone. Did I miss a rune in this zone while I was questing? Like, I'm not going to go back and just explore every nook and cranny looking to see if there's something there. So did I miss something when I was going through? And for me, that's how I was doing alts, especially because that gave me the opportunity to sort of go through the zone and still have the chance to discover things as I was going through. But then, like, once I finished Loch Modan or whatever, I'm like, okay, I'm not going back to Loch Modan. I'm not going to go back and scour the whole zone to see if I missed anything. So look at this little table. Oh, there's one in Loch Modan that I don't have. Okay, now I know I can look and go get that. But I'm not like spoiling myself on how to get the others in the process. And of course, it probably goes without saying, but for videos that I'll be releasing on this channel about Season of Discovery, I'm not going to surprise you with any spoilers. There will be spoiler warnings when there need to be, clear ones marked on the screen so that you can like mute and wait for the spoiler warning to go away if you want to. And things that are like guides that like specifically talk about, for example, the Nomergon video that I'm going to make. That one will be very clear from the beginning. Like, this video will tell you how to do these fights. Just don't watch it if you don't want to know that information. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this video up there. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope everyone has an absolute blast in Season of Discovery Phase 2. Again, I'm going to be streaming it the entire time, so please do stop on by, give us a shout, let me know what's going on, and you might catch me doing something ridiculous in the process. And of course, reminder to please ask any questions that you want to see me answer in future episodes. You can just pop them right in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are and what you'd like to see me talk about, especially if you're questing through or you're leveling or whatever, and you have questions about how things are working in Season of Discovery Phase 2, or what my thoughts are on certain mechanics or what have you. Just pop that comment down below and I will get to it in a future video. Thanks once again to all of my patrons and everybody who's signed up over on Patreon. You can find that at patreon.com/Devilore. We did just release the first sort of pilot episode of Transmog Throwdown just a couple of days ago. It's all right. It's not, the show is not where I want it to be. And I've gotten some really good feedback and some good suggestions from people since posting it. So I think we're going to continue to sort of poke at that idea a little bit and try to come up with something that's a little bit more cohesive and feels a little bit more like content that I would produce in the process. But we'll be opening up signups for the next round of Transmog Throwdown, probably sometime in the next few days. So keep an eye out for that, especially if you're already signed up over on Patreon. If you're not signed up on Patreon, please. All right, I'm out of here. Thanks again so much, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you next time.